feel your organs shutting down, giving up on you one after another.
Wow. Hi, everyone. I'm Bianca Goladriga. Well, we all know the famous proverb that behind every great man is a great woman, and that definitely applies to our next guest. She's a wife, a mother, patriotic Russian, and a champion of democracy. She's also her husband's best friend and closest support system. Everyone welcome Evgenia Karamurza. So, Evgenia, let me ask you, it's now been 8 weeks since your husband was poisoned for the second time. How is Vladimir doing?
Well, first of all, please let me say that I'm truly honored and deeply humbled to be here today, because I know what incredible people were on the stage before me and what incredible people will be after. Volodya is back home and he's doing better. He's definitely looking better than he feels, but he's on a path to recovery yet again, and he's as fervent as always in his beliefs. And he's already back to work, basically. He's already speaking to everybody. He testified in Congress last week, and he's just trying. He's doing the same thing he's been doing for his whole life, basically. And another poisoning is not going to stop him.
Well, we mentioned the second poisoning. The first poisoning took place in 2015. He was in a coma for nearly a month in Russia. You were at his side every day. He couldn't speak. You didn't know if he knew that you were present in the room, yet you were with him. He miraculously recovered. And yet, take us back to 8 weeks ago when you got that phone call again. You were here in the States. He was in Moscow, and he called you to say, I'm not feeling well, and you knew it right away.
Yes, I knew it right away because, well, he called me at 5 a.m. Moscow time, and he told me that he was not feeling well at all, that his heart was racing, that he had trouble breathing. And yes, of course, I knew right away what was happening because it had already happened once 2 years ago. And because I think for these 2 years, I'd been expecting something like that to happen again.
You're a mother of 3 children. They're all young, 11, 8, and I believe 5 is the youngest. You've been very forthcoming with them and telling them and open with them about what your husband was going through. How do you tell them that people try to kill their father and that it happened again, and yet he's out there still fighting for justice and democracy, but risking his life as well?
Well, you know what? There is no point lying to your children. I don't believe there is any. The younger ones don't really understand what's happening. For them, it's enough to say that their father is very sick and I need to be there for him. The oldest one understands much more. And she's 11, so she's almost a teenager, at least she acts like one. And she, you know, around Christmas time, we were having this family dinner, and we were talking about different things. Then she looked at her dad and said, "You know, Daddy, if you ever go back, and if it ever happens again, you're going to work as a librarian."
Less risky job.
And when I brought him back, and I brought him home, she looked at him, did like that, and she said, "Well, you know what I'm going to say, right?" So she understands much more, but I think that she also understands that her father is a great man, that he's a fighter, a real fighter. And I know that she's terrified, but at the same time, growing up in his presence, seeing him do what he does every single day, empowers her too. She believes that if you stand up for your beliefs, if you stand up for your principles, you still can win. You still can, because, well, this is the only way. You've got to fight.
And talk about what he is fighting for, because he was on a crusade against corruption, against Vladimir Putin, promoting democracy throughout Russia, and then he was poisoned again. When the second call came to you, did you think that it was the first person, meaning maybe coming from Putin, or Putin had ordered this and that they were coming and finishing the job, or trying to finish the job?
Well, I don't think that we will ever know what happened exactly, but I do believe that Putin's government and Vladimir Putin himself is responsible for creating such a climate in our country where opposition activists, ordinary people standing up for their beliefs, can get intimidated, threatened, thrown in jail, and killed for their beliefs.
And poisoning has become a relatively inexpensive and efficient way of going after dissidents and people that the government opposed. In fact, these were KGB tactics, and you were lucky. Talk about that, because when he was first hospitalized after the first poisoning, doctors didn't know what it was. They had to look for what the actual poison was to find out how to treat it.
Well, they never found out the exact toxin. They've never found out the exact toxin used the second time, too. They said that the clinical picture was exactly the same as 2 years ago, and they were sure that some toxin had been used. His organs were failing one after another, and in a matter of hours, and in 6 hours, he was on life support for all his major organs. So this was something very strong, apparently. And yes, such ways of dealing with opponents have been known in Russia for a while. Litvinenko, who was poisoned in Great Britain, died after drinking tea laced with polonium. And according to a British public inquiry, it was Andrei Lugavoy who had put polonium in his tea. You know where this man is today? He was rewarded with a seat in Russian parliament for successfully accomplishing his mission.
Yeah, because that's normal. That's what happens when somebody attempts to murder somebody else. They're rewarded when they come home in a democracy.
The Magnitsky Act.
Well, let's talk about the Magnitsky Act, because this is something that you really think, out of all the other actions taken against Vladimir Putin, gets under his skin the most. Tell us about Magnitsky and who he was and why this act, you believe, is so effective.
This is an extremely important piece of legislation. And yes, many people have heard of the Magnitsky Act. Not everyone might know that there is this real tragic story behind this act. Sergei Magnitsky was a Moscow lawyer who uncovered a large-scale tax fraud scheme involving Russian officials. These same officials threw him in jail, and after he spent a year in prison, he was tortured to death. None of the Russian officials involved in his killing was punished. On the contrary, they were promoted and received state awards. So you see that in Russia we have no rule of law anymore. The justice system has become a cruel joke. Courts are nothing, Russian courts are nothing but tools in the hands of the present government.
And with the Magnitsky Act, Magnitsky had been a lawyer, a tax attorney who worked for a man by the name of Bill Browder, made a lot of money in Russia, and on his behalf, for this cause, became a crusader for human rights and used this act and used the Magnitsky name coming here into the US and now in Canada as well to force sanctions against those who were involved in Sergei's death and against close cohorts of President Putin's and other rich billionaires.
Yes.
And that's an insult to these specific people that Putin doesn't want to take, and he wants to have this removed.
Yes, of course. Vladimir has been campaigning for the expansion of the scope of the bill when the bill was introduced in 2010. And he has been campaigning with Boris Nemtsov and Garry Kasparov first, and he is doing it alone now, to add new names to the list, to the Magnitsky list. The Sergei Magnitsky Rule of Law Accountability Act was adopted in 2012. And since then, Volodya has been campaigning to add new names to the list. Why this is a very important piece of legislation is because this act is not directed at the Russian people. This law does not target Russia as a country. It targets specific individuals involved in human rights violations and corruption in Russia. This act imposes US visa bans and asset freezes on specific individuals implicated in human rights violations. And the outgoing Obama administration just added a new name in January of this year, just added another very important name to this list. This is General Alexander Bastrykin. He's head of the Russian Investigative Committee, who personally oversees all the politically motivated cases against Russian opposition activists. He is also known for a story that he doesn't try to hide. He took a leading Russian journalist into the woods and personally threatened him with murder. And he said that, well, you know what, nothing's going to happen to me because I'm going to be the one to investigate it.
Yeah. Taking pride in saying that.
Yes.
And all of this is happening under the backdrop of a new administration, and I think people are still trying to wrap their heads around what is this fascination that President Trump seemed to have with Vladimir Putin throughout the campaign. He's managed to offend just about everybody except for Vladimir Putin. And in fact, in an interview with Bill O'Reilly, and when Bill O'Reilly asked about this specific issue and what he thought of Vladimir Putin, because he called him, rightly so, a thug and a killer, here's what President Trump said.
Do you respect Putin?
I do respect him.
Do you?
But
Why?
Well, I respect a lot of people, but that doesn't mean I'm going to get along with him. He's a leader of his country.
Putin's a killer.
A lot of killers. We've got a lot of killers. Why, you think our country's so innocent?
So as somebody whose husband has now been, his life has been attempted twice now, how do you respond to that?
You know what, frankly, the fact itself that a leader of a country, the system of which is based on the rule of law and respect for its rights, for its citizens' rights, can express admiration or respect for an authoritarian ruler who intimidates, threatens, and kills his opponents is, well, disquieting, to say the least.
Yeah.
And also, I do not believe that Vladimir Putin can be called a leader. A leader is someone who is chosen by his or her own people to represent these people, to lead these people. Vladimir Putin was not chosen. He's been in power for 17 years. For 17 years, we hadn't had one free and democratic election in our country.
And yet he remains popular among Russians, though we have seen protests as recently as last week. How do you see this ending? And what is Vladimir's next goal? What does he do next? Because I know doctors have told you if he's poisoned again, he dies.
Well, you know what? Senator McCain, in the words of Senator McCain, which I think describe Vladimir pretty well, courage is not the absence of fear. It is the capacity to act despite our fears. And Vladimir will not be intimidated. He will not be scared into crawling under a rock to wait it out there. And in this regard, a single person can become a force to be reckoned with, can become a champion for change. I believe that he will continue to fight because this is who he is. He wants a better future for his country. He wants a better future. He wants a better Russia for his children. We have 3 children, and Russian is a big part of our culture.
You want to go back one day.
The most important part. And we teach them Russian. They can all read and write and speak fluent Russian. Even the 5-year-old, he can already read in Russian. So we want them to be able to go back to Russia without being afraid for their lives. We want them to appreciate this great, amazing culture.
Without Vladimir Putin in charge?
Definitely. Definitely without Vladimir Putin. And as for his popularity, I don't believe that Vladimir Putin is popular. You know, the most recent protests showed that. These protests swept across Russia. More than 80 Russian cities and towns participated in these protests, including small towns where nothing of the sort had ever happened before. And, you know, the composition of these protests, the protest participants, they were young people. Young people, these were kids in their teens, and you know,
don't get that information necessarily from television.
Yes, and propaganda doesn't work for them anymore. You know, it just doesn't work on them. It doesn't influence them because they live online.
Yeah,
nowadays.
And they see what's happening around the world.
And they see what's happening, and these are the kids that some of them were born under President Putin. They were definitely raised under President Putin. They don't know anything else.
And yet they want to change. In the final moments here, Evgeny, I began with the American proverb that behind every great man is a great woman. Let me end with a famous Russian proverb, because an enemy will agree, but a friend will argue. Your husband is your best friend. Do you ever argue with him about his desire to keep fighting despite the risk he's putting his own life in?
No, we don't argue, no. I try to be there for him. You know, it's just, I am afraid, of course. I'm afraid. I'm a normal person. I am afraid. But you know, I think that fear is an interesting feeling in the sense that it affects people differently. Some people tend to freeze when they're frightened, others flee, and that maybe is the most natural reaction. I mean, these people have a well-developed self-preservation instinct. I think I belong to those who sort of dash forward when terrified. It doesn't necessarily make me a courageous person, just my reaction to fear. It has come in handy on multiple occasions recently, and I can't complain about that.
I think Vladimir would say you're being a bit modest when you say that.
Well, we'll continue to do what we're doing, and I'm going to be there for him.
Well,
because he is amazing, and I have great admiration I am so proud of him for what he does. I admire and respect him deeply.
Well, we all do. We all do. So, Evgeny, большое спасибо. Thank you. Thank you.